You've seen it. Maybe in person, maybe on a screen. A preacher on a stage, thousands of people in front of him, calling someone out of the crowd. He describes their condition without being told. He lays his hand on them, and they collapse, or weep, or declare that the pain they've carried for years is suddenly gone. The crowd erupts. Someone is healed. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a question has been sitting. Not whether the person in the crowd felt something real. They clearly did. The question is different. How does the preacher know what to say? How does he call the right person, describe the right condition, produce the right response with such apparent precision? The answer is not supernatural. It is psychology. Documented, reproducible, teachable psychology. Techniques developed over centuries of stage performance, refined through decades of televangelist practice, and now understood in detail by researchers who have studied exactly how they work. By the end of this, you'll understand the specific psychological mechanisms behind faith-healing performances, the techniques that make the impossible appear real, and why the experience of the people in the crowd is genuine, even when what they believe produced it is not. There is a technique called cold reading. It has been used by mentalists, fortune-tellers, mediums, and faith healers for at least 2 centuries. The term cold reading refers to the ability to make accurate-seeming statements about a specific person without any prior knowledge of them, drawing only on information gathered in real time from the person's appearance, behavior, and responses. The foundational technique is the Barnum statement. Named after P.T. Barnum, the showman, a Barnum statement is a description that sounds specific and personal, but actually applies to a large proportion of the general population. You have struggled with self-doubt at times, though people around you wouldn't always know it. You have experienced pain in your body, particularly your back, your knees, or your shoulders, that you've been carrying for longer than you should have. You have a sense that things could be better, that you haven't quite reached the potential you know you have. These statements, delivered with authority and apparent certainty, produce a strong sense of recognition in the listener. Because they describe experiences that are near universal. Because the listener, focused on finding where the statement applies to them, notices the parts that fit and unconsciously discards the parts that don't. Because the emotional context, a large crowd, shared expectation, the authority of the speaker, amplifies the perceived accuracy of every statement that seems to land. Psychologist Bertram Forer demonstrated this in a classic 1948 study. He gave his students a personality test and then gave each of them what he said was their individual assessment. In reality, every student received the same text, a collection of Barnum statements taken from a newspaper astrology column. When asked to rate the accuracy of their individual assessment, students gave an average score of 4.3 out of 5. They believed they were reading a precise, personalized description of themselves. They were all reading the same document. Here is how cold reading works in a faith-healing context. The preacher is not operating from zero information. He has been running an information-gathering operation from the moment his audience arrived. In large healing ministry operations, this often involves congregation members, sometimes called prayer workers or ministry assistants, who mingle with the crowd before the service. They introduce themselves as fellow attendees. They engage people in conversation. They ask how they heard about the event, what brought them today, what they are hoping for. The responses are recorded, sometimes in writing, sometimes via earpiece to a person offstage who relays information to the preacher during the performance. This is called hot reading. The preacher knows specific information because it was gathered in advance and delivered to him through a concealed channel. James Randi, the magician and skeptic who spent decades exposing faith healers, documented this technique specifically in his investigation of televangelist Peter Popoff in the 1980s. Randi and his team discovered that Popoff's wife was reading information from prayer request cards that audience members had filled out upon arrival and transmitting it to Popoff via a radio frequency receiver concealed in his ear. The information that appeared miraculous, the preacher knowing names, addresses, and specific medical conditions of people he had never met, was being read to him by his wife while he performed. When Randi's team broadcast the frequency publicly and played the recordings on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, Popoff's ministry collapsed. Within a year, he had filed for bankruptcy. The hot reading technique, however, is only one part of the system. The cold reading skills are deployed in combination to fill in gaps, to generalize from specific information to broader claims, to produce the appearance of knowledge that exceeds what was actually gathered. The combination is more convincing than either alone. And most audiences have no framework for identifying either. Here is the psychological mechanism that makes the combined technique so effective. It begins with expectation. Research on expectation and perception has established that what people expect to experience shapes what they actually experience in ways that are measurable at the neurological level. When a person enters a healing service with the expectation that they will witness or receive a miracle, their brain is already primed to interpret ambiguous events as confirmatory. Suggestibility increases. The threshold for experiencing a response drops. The specific psychological and physiological effects of the social environment, the music, the crowd, the shared emotional arousal, create a state of heightened receptivity that makes suggestion extraordinarily powerful. This is not a criticism of the people in the crowd. It is a description of normal human neuroscience under specific conditions. The human brain is a prediction machine. It constantly generates models of what is happening and what will happen next. When the model strongly predicts a specific experience, when the expectation is high, ambiguous incoming information is interpreted through that model. A person expecting to feel the presence of something supernatural in a crowd of thousands experiencing the same expectation in a space designed through music and lighting and architecture to maximize arousal and suggestibility will often feel something that matches the expectation. Not because they are naive, not because they are less intelligent than people who don't feel it, because they are human. And human brains, under these conditions, do exactly what they were built to do. Here is the mechanism behind the physical responses: the falling, the shaking, the crying, the reports of pain suddenly disappearing. The first is the ideomotor effect. Documented by William Benjamin Carpenter in 1852 and extensively studied since, the ideomotor effect refers to the phenomenon of involuntary, unconscious physical movements produced by thought or expectation alone. When a person strongly anticipates a specific physical response, has seen others produce that response, expects to produce it themselves, is in a social context where that response is the norm, their body will often produce a version of the response without any deliberate action on their part. The expectation generates the movement. The falling backward that characterizes being slain in the spirit is a consistent result of the ideomotor effect in the context of high expectation, physical touch, and backward pressure from the preacher's hand combined with an expectation of falling. It is not fakery on the part of the person who falls. They fall because their body, primed by expectation and social pressure, responds to touch in the direction that suggestion and observation have already established as the expected direction. The second mechanism is the placebo effect. This is perhaps the most extensively studied phenomenon in medicine, and its implications for healing contexts are significant. Research has established that placebo effects are not merely subjective, they produce measurable physiological changes. The belief that a treatment is occurring activates the same neural and biochemical pathways that an actual treatment would activate. Pain relief through placebo is real pain relief. The opioid system activates. The experience of reduced pain is neurologically genuine. In a context of high expectation, social reinforcement, and the authority of a declared healer, placebo effects can be powerful enough to produce experiences of dramatic symptom relief. This is not the same as curing an underlying condition. A person with a chronic structural back problem who experiences a placebo-mediated pain relief response during a healing service may genuinely feel less pain in the moment. The structural problem is unchanged. The pain will return. But in the moment, the relief is real. And the experience of that real relief in the emotionally charged context of a healing service is interpreted as miraculous. Here is the mechanism behind the knowledge that seems most impossible to explain without supernatural intervention. The preacher calling out conditions that seem far too specific to be guessed. Not general pain, but the specific kind. Not general illness, but the named disease. The explanation combines two elements. The first is selection. Among thousands of people in attendance, a very large number will have the conditions being named. When a preacher says someone in this room has been suffering from a problem with their kidney, or with their left shoulder, or with grief over a child, the statistical probability that multiple people in a crowd of thousands match is very high. The preacher has not named one person out of thousands correctly. He has named a condition that applies to hundreds of people in the room and is waiting for the confirmation response from any of them. The crowd, observing only the one person who steps forward, sees precision. What actually occurred was a probability game with excellent odds. The second element is called subjective validation. Psychologist Stuart Weiss at Connecticut College has documented how people connect vague claims to their own specific situations through a process of motivated matching. When a person hears a claim and is motivated to find themselves in it, when they want to be the person the preacher is describing, they will make the connection even when the specifics are not precise. The preacher says heart condition. The person listening has a parent who died of heart disease or has felt irregular heartbeats for years that turned out to be anxiety. They step forward. The preacher's apparent accuracy is confirmed. The gap between what was said and what is actually true is closed by the listener. There is one more mechanism, perhaps the most powerful of all: social proof and conformity. Research by Solomon Asch in the 1950s established the extraordinary power of social conformity, the tendency of individuals to adjust their perceptions and reports to match the apparent consensus of the group around them. In Asch's experiments, participants would agree with an obviously incorrect answer given by Confederates in the group, simply to conform with the group consensus. In a healing service, the social conformity dynamic operates at scale. Thousands of people who have come specifically expecting to experience something, who want to experience it, who have invested time, money, and hope in being there, observe each other's responses. They see people falling, weeping, reporting healing. They hear testimonies. The social environment establishes a very clear norm. This is the experience you should be having. And for many people, the social pressure to conform to that norm is experienced as the experience itself. The emotion that wells up is real. It is emotion, heightened by social arousal, by shared expectation, by the specific context. But it is not what the performance has claimed it to be. It is what happens when human beings, with all their neurological tendencies toward conformity, suggestion, and expectation, are placed in carefully designed environments and told what to feel. They feel it. And then they are told that what they felt was a miracle. Here is what makes this particular topic more than a catalogue of deception techniques. The harm. People with terminal diagnoses who attend healing services and leave believing they have been cured sometimes stop medical treatment. The psychological relief they experienced, real, genuine, powerful, is interpreted as evidence that the underlying disease is gone. It is not. People who have spent money they cannot afford on healing ministries, sometimes significant amounts, because many of these operations are financially sophisticated in ways that match their theatrical sophistication, discover that the healing did not hold, that the pain returned, that the condition remains. And they are left to process not just the original suffering, but the additional suffering of having believed something that was not true. Research by sociologist Meredith McGuire at Trinity University, documenting the psychological aftermath of participation in healing ministries, found a consistent pattern. People for whom the healing experience did not produce lasting change, the large majority, were left with a specific question that compounded their distress. What did they do wrong? Because the framework of healing ministry almost always assigns the failure of healing to the faith of the recipient. Not enough belief, not enough surrender, a hidden sin that blocked the blessing. The mechanism that produced the experience, psychology, expectation, suggestion, placebo, is invisible. The mechanism that is presented for the failure is the person's own spiritual inadequacy. The deception compounds. You've seen it. That's where we started. And now you know what you are actually seeing. The techniques are old. They have been documented, analyzed, and exposed for more than a century. Magicians and mentalists have used them for stage performance while being transparent about their nature. Researchers have mapped the psychology in detail. What makes the faith-healing context different is not the techniques. It is what those techniques are presented as. Not performance, not psychology, proof of the supernatural. And the cost of that specific claim, to the people who believe it, who make decisions based on it, who are told when it fails that the failure is theirs, is not the same as the cost of a stage magic show that astonishes and entertains. The capacity of the human brain to produce powerful experiences under the right conditions is not a flaw. It is a feature of how the brain works. It can be used to help people, through placebo medicine, through therapeutic suggestion, through the genuine power of belief and community to affect well-being. Or it can be used to extract money, loyalty, and medical compliance from people in pain by convincing them that a stage performance is evidence of divine intervention. The techniques are the same. The intent is what differs. And the intent, in most large-scale commercial healing ministry, is not difficult to identify once you know what you are looking at. If understanding how human psychology actually works and how it can be used and misused matters to you, subscribe. No dogma in either direction. Just the documented research on how the human mind works, what it is susceptible to, and what that means for the decisions you make. The next video goes into the psychology of cults. Specifically, what makes ordinary intelligent people join groups that, from the outside, seem impossible to explain. Hit subscribe. That one is worth staying for. There is a specific technique used in large healing events that deserves its own examination. It is called the word of knowledge. In faith healing theology, the word of knowledge refers to the supernatural ability to receive specific information about a person, their name, their condition, their location, without any natural means of knowing it. When a preacher stands on a stage and says, "There is a woman in the 3rd section, wearing blue, who has been suffering with pain in her right knee for 11 years, and she feels the heat of healing moving through her right now," the crowd witnesses what appears to be a specific, verifiable, impossible piece of knowledge. There are several mechanisms that produce this. The most common is the earpiece. Demonstrated and documented in the Popoff case, and subsequently identified in multiple other healing ministries, the earpiece allows information gathered from prayer cards, from assistants in the crowd, or from online research on ticketed attendees to be fed to the preacher in real time. The second is the stacked deck. In environments where audience members fill out forms, those forms can be reviewed before the service. The preacher has seen the information and presents it as divinely received. The third, and the one that operates even without prior information, is a technique magicians call shotgunning combined with fishing. The preacher makes a series of statements in rapid succession, each slightly more specific than the last. He watches the crowd for the confirmation response, the person who lights up, who looks around, who nudges a neighbor. Then he focuses on that person. He asks leading questions framed as confirmations. Does that resonate with you? Is that right? And the person, now at the center of attention, in a state of heightened emotional arousal, with hundreds or thousands of witnesses observing, will almost always say yes to a version of the statement, even if the specifics required adjustment to fit. The preacher has not demonstrated supernatural knowledge. He has performed a sophisticated psychological technique in a context where the audience has no framework for identifying it. And the confirmation, "Yes, that's right, yes, that's me," is delivered publicly, reinforcing the event for the entire crowd. What is witnessed is not a miracle being confirmed. It is a successful cold reading being socially ratified by someone who wanted, very deeply, to be the person it was about. Research on cold reading by psychologist Ray Hyman at the University of Oregon has documented how even people who initially approach a reading with skepticism can be drawn into confirmation by the combination of correct feeling statements, emotional arousal, and the desire to find meaning in what is being said. Skepticism is not as protective as most skeptics believe. The techniques work on people who do not believe they will work. Because the mechanisms, expectation, conformity, ideomotor response, placebo, operate below the level of deliberate belief. They are neurological, not theological, and knowing their names does not make you immune to them. It makes you slightly less likely to mistake them for something else. There is one more dimension to this that the research documents with particular clarity. It concerns what happens inside the brain of the person who experiences the healing. Not the preacher. The person in the crowd who stood up, who felt something, who walked away believing something had changed. Their experience was real. This is the part that often gets lost in discussions that focus entirely on the deception techniques. The feelings were genuine. The sensations were genuine. The emotional release, sometimes profound, sometimes the culmination of months or years of pain and hope, was a real neurological event. The placebo response is not imaginary. The endorphin release during heightened emotional arousal is not imaginary. The genuine short-term pain relief that can occur in conditions of high expectation and belief is not imaginary. What is constructed is the explanation for those experiences. The experience itself was produced by the brain's own chemistry, operating under specific social and psychological conditions. The explanation, that it was produced by a supernatural intervention delivered through the agency of a specific person on a stage, is the construction. And the construction matters, because explanations shape behavior. A person who believes their cancer has been supernaturally healed may stop chemotherapy. A person who believes their depression has been lifted by divine intervention may discontinue medication. A person who believes their chronic condition was cured at a healing service may delay or abandon the medical investigation that would identify what is actually causing their symptoms. The gap between the genuine experience and the false explanation is where the real harm lives. Not in the experience, in what people do because of how the experience was explained to them. Research by sociologist Candy Gunther Brown at Indiana University, published under the title Testing Prayer, attempted to measure the medical outcomes of healing prayer in a rigorous way. The findings were as follows. Some participants reported improvements in subjective experience, pain levels, emotional state, sense of well-being. These improvements were genuine. They were also consistent with what would be expected from the psychological mechanisms described in this video, operating without any supernatural component. No documented cases of healing from structural organic disease, verified through medical records before and after, were found in the study. The experience is real. The mechanism is psychological. The claim is neither. And the cost of the claim, to the people who act on it when the stakes are medical, financial, or relational, is real in a way that the experience of the healing event itself often is not. That is the full picture. Not whether people feel something. They do. Whether what they feel means what they are told it means. It does not.